Listen, what makes the Battle of Austerlitz interesting is that, unlike in my last video, the Battle of Marengo, where Napoleon here and the French army are caught off guard and they have to play defense for most of the battle, reacting to the situation as it changes, Austerlitz is kind of like the complete opposite of that, in that at the battle, Napoleon's got a plan and he executes that plan to perfection. Now, you have to understand that, historically speaking, it's not often that a general goes, oh, we're going to do this, and the enemy's going to do that, and we win. But that's kind of what happens at Austerlitz. And here, let me show you very briefly, very quickly, what his plan is. On the one side, you have the French in blue, and on the other side, here in red, you have the Allies, who were the Russians and the Austrians, but really it was the Russians who did most of the fighting on the day. And Napoleon says, look, he says, I know that these guys are just itching to attack my right flank, like this. Why he knows this, I'll get into later. But he says, I know they want to attack my right flank, so I'm going to do everything I can to bait them, to lure them into doing this, like this. And when they attack my right flank, they're going to leave their center exposed. And I'm then going to smash through that center. I'm going to punch right through it with my own infantry. And I'm going to defeat the Allies in detail. Now, obviously, this is a gross oversimplification of the battle because it leaves a lot of questions unanswered, like how does Napoleon prevent his own right flank from getting rolled up? And how does he plan on punching through the center when the Russians occupy the high ground? The Russians are on a place known as the Pratzen Heights, which is like this high ground. Artist Jean Faure has a painting of it that you can see on screen now. It gives you a good idea of what this elevated terrain looks like. And so I've decided I'm going to do this battle a little differently. Rather than Marengo, which I sort of did hour by hour, I'm going to divide this battle into two parts. The first is talking about the bait, the trap that Napoleon sets to his right. And the second is discussing his punch through the middle. Because for me, these are the two interesting, important tactical details at the battle. In the weeks leading up to the battle, Napoleon Bonaparte finds himself in a really strange position. Because if he wants this great plan of his to work, then on the one hand, he needs the Allies, the Austrian and Russian high command, to believe that he and his army's position is weak, right? He needs them to think that he's in a tactically and strategically weak position. But at the same time, in the months of September, October, and November of 1805, he's done things that a weak person wouldn't do. Like neutralizing half of the Austrian army at the Ulm campaign, or capturing the city of Vienna. So in order to give this illusion of weakness, he starts doing all these things to give off that impression. So for example, in the months leading up to December, it was the French that stood on the Pratzen Heights. He orders them off of it, down into the valleys below, which of course the Russians then quickly occupy. At a meeting with this Russian prince, a guy with the most stereotypical Russian name I've ever heard, Peter Petrovich Bolgorsky. At a meeting with this guy, Napoleon makes sure that he sticks around just long enough to spot what look like signs of a retreat. And in the valleys, rivers, and villages that lay on the right side of the battlefield, he leaves a tiny force, something like 3,000 men, knowing that this is the flank that the Russians are most eager to attack, because that's the direction that Vienna's in. He correctly assumes that the Allies must be itching to cut off his communication lines with the Austrian capital. And incredibly, all of this scheming, all of these small details work, because in the early hours of the 2nd of December, 1805, the Russians make their move. Between 7 and 8 a.m., they send 3 of the 5 columns that occupied Pratzen down towards this southern side of the battlefield. And at first, it seems like everything's going according to plan. The Russians make light work of the tiny French forces stationed there. They capture a bunch of villages, but right as it comes time to move north and roll up the rest of the French forces, in comes the Third Corps of Marshal Louis-Nicolas Davout, where for the next few hours, he and 10,000 Frenchmen managed to keep 36,000 Russians pinned down whilst Napoleon makes a move for the now exposed center. The men ordered to charge up the slopes of the Pratzen Heights belonged to the 4th Corps of Marshal Jean de Dieu Soult. Specifically, it is the divisional commanders Saint-Hilaire and Dominique Van Damme. Now, despite outnumbering the Russians that now occupy Pratzen, this fight for the high ground, it's not an easy one, it's vicious. And it's Saint-Hilaire's men who are sent up first, and I don't think I would be able to do the fighting justice. I don't think I'd be able to describe it well enough. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to borrow from the words of Andrew Roberts and his book Napoleon the Great. So let me read to you how Mr. Roberts here describes the fighting. Quote, "The attack was to start with Saint-Hilaire's division, which was hidden in the undulations and lingering mists of the Goldbach Valley. By 10 a.m., the sun had risen and burnt off the mist, and thenceforth, the son of Austerlitz became an iconic image of Napoleonic genius and luck. Soult harangued the 10th Leger, gave them treble brandy rations, and sent them up the slope. The French adopted the ordre mixte combination of line and column to attack, with a line of skirmishers in front, who charged straight into the 4th Russian column that was moving off the heights. Seeing the danger, Kutuzov sent Kolarev's Austrians to plug the gaps between the Russian columns, and in the fierce struggle that ensued, very few prisoners were taken, and virtually no wounded were left alive. By 11:30 a.m., Saint-Hilaire had reached the plateau, and Soult poured in many more men than the Russians as soon as they became available. Kutuzov was left watching in dismay, as 24,000 French engaged the 12,000 Allied forces still on the heights. He reversed the direction of the last of the southbound columns, but it was too late." End quote. So while Saint-Hilaire had made his thrust, Dominique Van Damme was also pushing to the north, supported by the corps of one Marshal Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte. He makes light work of the Russian forces thrown at him, until he manages to reach the Tsar's personal headquarters, Tsar Alexander I's personal headquarters. Such a move provokes a powerful response from the Russian command, who send in the Imperial Cavalry. And they push back Van Damme's division, enough for Napoleon to send in his own Imperial Guard, his own Imperial Cavalry under Marshal Jean-Baptiste Bessieres' leadership. And so for the next hour or so, you have these elite cavalry on both sides fighting each other, and the stalemate's finally broken when more of Marshal Bernadotte's men arrive on the flank, which causes the Russians to break and flee. By that point, it's like 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and the battle's pretty much over. The French have clear control of the Pratzen, and from this elevated terrain, it's easy to envelop and crush the remaining Allied forces still fighting in the north and the south of the battlefield. Now, that's the Battle of Austerlitz, or at least that's the important parts. There was obviously fighting in other sectors of the battlefield. You had Jeanlin and Murat fighting against Russian General Peter Bagration in the north. But can I talk for a second about how insane this whole thing was? The battle, or maybe the important parts of it, lasted maybe, I want to say, 6 hours. And just think for a moment about what Napoleon's done. He's this nobody from an island called Corsica. He's not even technically French. He's this nobody. And in half a day, he's crushed Tsar Alexander I, the man who inherited the Russian Empire from Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. He's dissolved the fucking Holy Roman Empire in an afternoon. How nuts is that? Anyway, that's the battle. And time for the collection book, I guess. Hey guys, so thank you so much for watching. Before I get to the collection book part of the video, I wanted to ask you guys what you thought of the way I made this battle, how I talked about Austerlitz. And the reason I'm asking, especially compared to my last video, Marengo, the reason I'm asking is because I think doing it this way, separating it into the two parts and talking about what's interesting makes more sense. One, because I like it, and two, because when I think about the reason why I make this channel, why I make these videos, it's not for me to, try and just narrate a bunch of events. You can go look up what happened at any battle on fucking Wikipedia. But what I want to do is I want to excite as many people as possible to go out there and read about all these interesting things, all these incredible events themselves. So that's my take on it. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you prefer this or a Marengo style video. Speaking of sources, I quoted this book in the video, Andrew Roberts' Napoleon the Great, and I can't recommend it enough. It's a fantastic book on Napoleon. It's thick, it's huge, it's like 800 pages or something. But I mean, when you consider the man's life, anything less wouldn't make sense. So if you want to learn more about the man, go out, buy this book, check it out. And it's fantastic, it's really good. I can't recommend it enough. Anyway, on to the collection book, where first we have Napoleon. Dun, 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 dun. So for Napoleon at Austerlitz, I chose this part of a painting by a guy called François Gérard, and here, if you can see it clearly. Now, I cropped the image, but to the left here, Napoleon's being presented with some captured Russian imperial flags and a captured Russian prince. See there, that's Napoleon at Austerlitz. So let's add that right there. Hey, there we go. That's Napoleon at Austerlitz done. Now, there were more than 3 marshals at the Battle of Austerlitz, but I chose Jean de Dieu Soult, this is Soult, for his charge up the Pratzen, and Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, this guy, and Bessières, Jean-Baptiste Bessières, here. Now you might notice that I did not include Louis-Nicolas Deveau. And the reason for this is because he fights this insane battle at the twin battles of Jena and Ostend, where the guy basically takes on half the Prussian army at a 2-to-1 disadvantage and wins. It's incredible, and I decided when I do that battle, I'll add him then. Here is Marshal Soult for his incredible work charging up the Pratzen Heights. Here is Bernadotte, Jean-Baptiste. There we go. We have Bessières. Hey, excellent. And last but not least, for the Imperial Guard, I chose a picture of the Mamluk cavalry for their role in fighting the Russian Imperial cavalry themselves. Look at this. Okay, there we go. Not the right size at all, but whatever. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you can like and subscribe as always, I do appreciate it. Your feedback, of course, is always valuable. And I'll see you all next video.